Now I would introduce Shri Dilip Karanji. He's a computational solid states physicist by training and has taught physics at number of universities. He also works as a freelance translator and a translation manager. His topic for today would be S.R. Goel as a novelist, as we have understood that Shri S.R. Goel ji successfully ran a business and also wrote apart from his civilizational cause and was a well-known novelist. I now request Dilip ji to share his views. Thank you.
So now when I start telling you about this novel, it is possible that I give you too much detail in some places and too little in some others. So when it's over, we'll go back and I'll try to answer your questions. But before I say anything, you must, first I would of course like to honor the memory of Sitaramji, whom I never met. I have met Dr. Elst and Dr. Shrikant Talagiriji, so I have got some first-hand, second-hand, but information about Sitaramji, but it's as good as first-hand because of the great authenticity of this, the information. So while I do wish to honor Sitaramji's memory, there are limitations of my own background. So I have read this Hindi novel, which is of more than 400 pages long, but I was myself a student who was, all my education has been in English, and so there are deficiencies in my background. So anything you, please bear that in mind. And so there is no substitute for you to read the book on your own. And so you must realize that there may be some errors on my part. So I needed the slide both to collect my own thoughts because there is a lot of things going on in this novel. So if it turns out that I'm reading in a very wooden manner, please feel free to send me a text, okay, or stop me in some way. It may also happen that I just don't find your message because now my screen is completely taken over by this PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so let me begin with this first slide. The title of the book is called Saptashila, and it is a novel by Sitaramji Goel. It was first published in 1960 by Bharati Sahitya Sadan, New Delhi, and then reprinted by Voice of India in 1999, and according to the book, also 2020. And it is named for, the title comes from words that occur in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. The Saptashila, which we can say the 7 graces, are usually translated as the 7 conditions of welfare in the English literature. So the author, as you all know, Sitaram Goel, is a historian, scholar of Sanskrit, political commentator, publisher, translator, and also novelist. Hello. Okay. Sitaramji has written a great historical novel called Saptashila around the theme of the 7 conditions of welfare that formed the Swadharma of the Vriji Confederacy. I will explain these terms as best as I can in the subsequent slides. So the very epilogue of the book begins with a paragraph. I'll read it in some detail. It's just that I don't want to hurry through this part. Okay, so for many years, the Vriji coalition of members of the Lichavi clan based in Vaishali had resisted capture by Ajatashatru, the ruler of Magadha. On Ajatashatru's orders, his chief minister, the Brahmana Varshakara, approached Lord Buddha and asked him the secret of the Vriji coalition's invincibility. The master mentioned the 7 conditions of welfare. I think they are called the Sapta Aparihaniya Shila, that formed the Swadharma of the Vriji confederacy, and said, O Brahmana, as long as the 7 conditions of welfare continue to be observed among the Vrijis, the coalition will flourish and not decline. And thereupon, Ajatashatru hatched a plot to destroy the Swadharma of the Vrijis. The rulers of the Vriji coalition, the members of the clan themselves, became Ajatashatru's accomplices in this plot. So here is another very insightful paragraph from the same epilogue. One group of the Lichavis had become followers of Adharma on account of their blind acceptance of demonic Persian values. So when I use the word demonic Persian values, it's a translation of Sitaramji's words Asura Tantra. The other group were followers of Swadharma, but devoid of Prajna. The onslaught of Adharma caused the Vriji coalition to become lax in the observance of Swadharma. And as a consequence, the Vriji nation lost its independence and was reduced to the status of a colony of Magadha. Now, all those who know Sitaramji or his writings will know what he is hinting at. So, as Shrikantji just explained, Sitaram Goyalji laid the ideological basis of Hindu political thinking. So he is ultimately concerned with the Hindus' Swadharma. And when I was translating the epilogue, I hoped to find an equivalent for the word Swadharma, which is used very often, but my translations were never good enough. So I just retained the word Adharma, Swadharma, and a few such Sanskrit words. So the historical setting of the novel is like this. The Buddha has recently attained Mahaparinirvana. So the Buddha is no longer on the planet. Now in the text, it becomes clear that the Sangha is not, the direction the Sangha is going to take is not yet fixed. So at this time, the eastern part of Aryavarta is populated by a number of independent nation states. They are not kingdoms, but Ganarajyas. They are Janapadas. So Vaishali is ruled by a number of different clans. Foremost among them are the Lichavis. And the nearby city of Mithila is home of the people who are called Videha. Kushinagara, where the Buddha attains Mahaparinirvana, is the home of the Malla nation. There is a neighboring state, Kosala, with a capital at Shravasti, which is home to a number of different clans. And then finally, there is the rising power Magadha. So the novel deals with the fate of the people, the Janapada that is centered on the capital Vaishali. It is governed by members of a certain clan, Lichavis, and I am not very sure where the term Vriji comes from, but the word Vriji is often used as almost synonymously with the word Lichavi. At least that is what I got from my reading of the book. So the Lichavis are the most important clan in Vaishali. and they are one of the 8 clans which are called collectively known as the Ashtakulika, and they form the warrior class of that nation state. So since the Lichavis are the predominant group there, they are often named as synonymous with the Vrijis, synonymous with Vaishali. This confederacy is fiercely independent, and it has successfully defended itself against Magadha, which is a rising power, and which in the subsequent years will assimilate a number of these nation states. Okay. So before the story begins, there is a certain background which we need to know, in the absence of which the story will not make sense to us. So Magadha and the Vrijis had already experienced a certain period of estrangement before the plot begins in this novel. And that had started even when the Buddha was alive, even in the years before he had left even Kapilavastu. So the differences between Magadha and Vriji had a long history. But the Vriji Confederacy is fiercely independent, and it has staved off all the attacks from Magadha, which were initially started by the king Bimbisara. But Bimbisara he loses his appetite for conquest once he is influenced by the Buddha. And then he becomes a follower of the Sangha and a promoter of the Sangha. But the differences with Magadha, they resume under the rule of Ajatashatru, who is Bimbisara's son. He is a patricide. He has killed his father, and it is rumored that the prince has killed his own father under the instigation of a certain Brahmin whose name is Varshakara. So Magadha is ruled by King Ajatashatru, son of Bimbisara. And as I said before, Bimbisara has renounced war, but Ajatashatru is kindling war again. So Ajatashatru, he is himself the son of a princess from the Vriji clan, or a relation thereof. And he's often called a Vaidehi Putra. So he is descended from people from Videha. As the previous slide had shown, Videha is based in, the Videha people are based in Mithila, and they are somewhat like allies of the Vrijis, or members of the same extended clan. King Ajatashatru is on the war path because he is under the influence of Devadatta, who was Buddha's cousin and rival. And under Bimbisara, Magadha was inimical to the nations Vatsa and Kashi, which were to its west, and Anga to its east. So Magadha is in what we now call Bihar, Anga is in what we call Bengal, and Kashi and Vatsa are in the west, in what we now call Uttar Pradesh. Anga and Kashi had an alliance, and it is not clear whether the alliance was only meant to somehow contain Magadha or not. But Kashi and its neighboring state Kosala were at war. Magadha is not yet a big power, it's a rising power. But Magadha overruns the Anga nation, which is to the east. And as soon as Magadha conquers Anga, Kosala realizes that it has now a very formidable enemy to its as a neighbor. So Kosala and Kashi, they make a hasty peace, because all these little nation states realize that Magadha is going to be the big superpower, and they had better watch out. And in spite of the fact that Kashi has made a peace with Kosala, Magadha, it is not able to withstand the forces of the Magadhas, and they cross the Bhagirathi Ganga river. It's an unprecedented attack, and Kashi is completely overrun. At this time, Kosala is ruled by a king named Prasenajit, who happens to be a personal friend of Bandhula Malla, who is, I don't, the novel doesn't make it clear whether he's a king or not, but he's in any case a very influential warrior from Kushinagar. So Kosala wants to somehow come to terms with Magadha, but Kosala is afraid that Magadha will reject any offer of an alliance. So the king Prasenajit of Kosala is trying an underhand strategy. He wants the Vrijis to attack Magadha so that Magadha will be engaged on two fronts, and they will be more willing to settle terms with themselves. Now, Bandhula has some influence on the Vrijis, and he prevails on the Vrijis to attack Magadha. So when the Magadhan forces are marching towards Kosala, the Vrijis attack from the north, but war doesn't take place. Magadha realizes it cannot fight on two fronts, and so it ends war with Kosala. The daughter of the king of Kosala is married to Bimbisara to cement the alliance. So Bimbisara first renounces war only out of tactical need, but later he comes under the influence of Buddha and he becomes a genuinely peace-loving person. And then he also makes peace with the Vrijis, and he is then married to Princess Chellana, daughter of Raja Chetaka, and this princess will now become the mother of Ajatashatru. So on the face of it, it looks like peace has returned, but due to the machinations of Devadatta, who acts on the mind of Ajatashatru, Ajatashatru will continue to remember the one time when the Vrijis attacked Magadha, even though he is himself descended from the same community, and he resurrects that old grievance later on. Okay, now Bandhula Malla, who was the person who was responsible for inviting the Vrijis to attack Magadha, himself creates trouble with the Vrijis. And the trouble that happens is due to for a trivial reason. Bandhula's wife wants to bathe in the holy waters of a sacred lake, which happens to be in the Vriji territory. It is not clear why he does not simply seek permission from an ally. He ends up violating the border, takes his wife to the sacred pond, and attacks the guards. And that insults the pride of the Vrijis, and they send a punitive squad under a person named Mahali. And we will discover that Mahali is the king of the Vrijis. So Mahali fights bravely, but he is injured. He loses a part of his lip, and so he is called Ardhoshta, or the half-lipped one. Full-scale war is averted, but there is a slight souring of relations between the Mallas and the Vrijis. This will become consequential later. So the chief characters of this novel are the Princess Vatsala. She is the heroine of the novel. She is the daughter of Mahali. And Princess Vatsala is in love with the commander of a fort, Durgapala Aniruddha. But Aniruddha, to begin with, he's engaged to a different lady. So Mahali is the Raja of the Vrijis, but then they are not really a monarchy, a single hereditary monarchy. So from my reading, it appears that the Raja is just a first among equals, and perhaps they share the position in a kind of on a circulating basis. So Mahali is a man of great character, but he is an old man now, and so he is no longer very influential. So the next most important character is a monk, and I've called him a monk in training because though the novel doesn't say so, because he's still learning, he's still an apprentice. He's addressed as Ayushman, which I take to mean some kind of title given to monks. So his name is Udaya, and in his pre-monastic life, he had courted a noble Shakya girl named Anila. Anila will make a reappearance later. But when Uday meets Buddha, he completely loses interest in worldly matters and decides to seek realization. And this is explained very beautifully later on in a passage that Uday has not renounced passion. It is just that he becomes so mature in his in spiritual thinking or spiritual values that the passion just burns out of him. He is no longer capable of that passion. The other most important character is Arya Ratnakirti. He is a very distinguished and well-traveled nobleman. He has lived outside Vaishali, which is the Vriji capital, for many years. So the Vrijis are somewhat renowned all over Aryavarta as not being very cultured, but being very stoic, and they are renowned more for their warrior abilities than for their artistic abilities. And so Arya Ratnakirti he is not very pleased with the situation. He is more interested in what he thinks is culture. He's an admirer of Persian arts, and he will succeed the present king Arya Mahali as the Raja. So now Sitaramji never says this, but it becomes obvious that Arya Ratnakirti stands for Nehru. So he is somewhat contemptuous of his own culture. He's unwilling to actually fight, and even though he's unwilling to fight, later on he tries to start an unnecessary war, but he himself doesn't do the fighting. So there are other characters which are important too, and that is Pulomaja is the daughter of Arya Ratnakirti. She is not exactly an equivalent of Indira Gandhi. She is more of an artistic person. She is in love with the Durgapal Aniruddha, who is her fiance. Aniruddha is a stoic warrior type, but Pulomaja, his fiance, is more interested in the amorous arts. And so she is determined to cure her fiancé of his stoic nature and ignorance of the arts. The Durgapala Aniruddha is a commander of a fort on the frontier. So he is one of the other central characters, tragic figure in this novel. Then there is the minister Sunak Khata. He will be corrupted and become an agent of Ajatashatru. So Ajatashatru is the other character who does not formally appear in the novel except in the very end, but he is the prime a prime force against which Vaishali is fighting. So I repeat now, Ajatashatru has killed his father Bimbisara, supposedly under the instigation of an advisor named Varshakar. So the story will begin with Varshakara going to the Buddha and asking a question to the Buddha. But the subsequent history of Varshakara is a little murky. Though he is the minister who has been instigating Ajatashatru, he is disgraced and banished by Ajatashatru. And then he goes to the commander of the fort, Aniruddha, and somehow earns his trust. And so the Brahmin Varshakara seems to be on the side of Vaishali. We will discover that he was not on the side, that he was a secret agent, but when the story begins, he's on the side of Vaishali. He has been disgraced from Magadha. And the same Brahmin who is a spy becomes a minister among the Vrijis. So now we come to the 7 precepts, the Saptashila, for which the novel is named. So the 7 precepts are like this. The Vriji community, which is not a monarchy, but a kind of confederacy of noble people, they have frequent gatherings and their meetings are well attended. They assemble and disperse peacefully, and they attend to their affairs in concord. So in their unity is their strength. They do not change their ancient constitution, which is called the Praveni Pustak in the novel. So they do not frivolously enact new decrees, and they do not abolish existing ones. They always enforce their existing rules. They respect, honor, and esteem their elders and listen to their elders. So that makes 4 precepts. There are some more. The Vrijis are honorable. They do not abduct other people's women folk and detain them. They honor and esteem the religious shrines, both inside the capital of Vaishali and outside it. And they do not deprive them of the offerings made to the religious institutions. The Vrijis protect and guard the Arhatas, or all the realized people, or people who are on the path. So the 7 precepts of the Vrijis are described in somewhat Sanskritized language, which I had a little trouble translating. So I borrowed these translations from a widely quoted book, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, translated by Sister Vajira and Francis Story. And you can find the reference here. So the novel itself begins. The epilogue of the novel is Sitaram Goelji's description of Swadharma. But the novel formally begins with a chapter which is called Sthapana. We don't know what Sthapana is until we get into the novel, a few pages into the novel. So the monk Udaya has been studying the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. So in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, it is recorded that a Brahmin named Varshakara, who is the minister of Ajatashatru, asks the Buddha what is the reason for the Vriji coalition's invincibility. And the Blessed One explains the 7 precepts. So the whole story is recorded in the Buddhist scripture for the use of monks, so that they will know what are the the good 7 precepts. But this monk, Uday, happens to have been born in the Vriji Confederacy. And when he hears the name Brahman, the Varshakara, he begins to have some misgivings because he knows that the Brahman actually came to ask. The Brahman is a representative of Ajatashatru. So something about him makes him suspect that the Brahman is inside Vaishali. He is up to no good. He must be acting as a spy. So he tells his guide about his misgivings, and his guide first asks him to concentrate on his studies. But then the monk protests, and he places what he calls a sthapana, a proposition in front of his own teacher. And he says that now that the Buddha has passed away, the Sangha must uphold dharma. And the monk believes that his objections have arisen out of dharma. Okay, now may I please interrupt for just a second and ask you, am I going too slow? Do you think I will finish in the time given to me?
That depends on what you want to cover, Dilipji. If you need to.
Okay, can you tell me how much time has passed now already?
It's 11:41 right now. We have up to 12:05, 12:10. If some questions are asked, we need 5 minutes for Q&A also.
Okay, I'm afraid you will not be able to ask me any questions.
Okay.
My laptop is giving me a different time, so I had to ask you.
Yeah. No, sir, but you have around 10-15 minutes more up to.
Okay, very good. So I will try to hurry up.
And it's okay, sir. It's important you cover all the topics that you have to cover. Q&A can be a later part also. Yeah.
Okay. I won't take too much more time.
Thank you.
The plot is very complicated, at least in the beginning, and later it becomes completely clear. But without my explaining this, the words I will throw at you will be just confusing. Okay, so the monk now goes to Vaishali to see what is happening, but the plot has already thickened. And now I'll go a little faster. So fast forwarding through slide 16, which actually has some romantic stuff going on. When the commander of the fort meets his fiancée, she is very frivolous, but he's on a very serious mission and she does not appreciate it. So they have a little disagreement, which eventually becomes very serious. So the commander then goes to meet the princess. The princess is in love with him, but he is already betrothed to another. That will change. So the princess and the commander they discuss a certain plot, and there is a lengthy discussion in which the commander convinces the princess that the plot is feasible. So the next chapter begins with the capture of a fort called Pataligrama. It is not yet the famous city of Pataliputra. It is still Pataligrama, but it is a fort which belongs to Magadha. And the Vrijis, who are north of Magadha, manage to capture that fort. And the way they do it is they send a dance party led by a charming dancer first to the fort, and while the dancer is entertaining the soldiers, the commander of the Durgapala, Aniruddha, takes over the fort because he knows a secret passageway to get in. So the Vrijis score a military success with very little loss. And later it turns out that the secret informant was Varshakara. And the danseuse was none other than the princess herself. So the victory is celebrated by the townspeople, and the Brahmin Varshakara should have been regarded as a traitor, but he is accepted into Vaishali society because it is then argued that he betrayed his mother country only because he was trying to fight a patricide tyrant. He is actually a dharmic person. And so the Varshakara manages to gain the confidence of the people of Vaishali, and he becomes a very fast friend of the existing justice minister Sunakhatha. So we will discover that Sunakhatha has also been bribed. So they begin a culture of hedonism is promoted inside the Vriji Confederation. So previously they were stoic warrior people, but now they have been encouraged to become hedonists. Sunakhatha, the minister, proposes to the king that they must reinstitute the practice of having courtesans. And the king, of course, is shocked. They don't want any courtesans. But there was an ancient law which said that if there was a woman if there is a woman of great beauty who can make people fight among young men fight each other, then the woman can be made into a courtesan. So the minister hints to the king that such a fate may befall his own daughter, who is really very beautiful. And so the king becomes fearful that he may lose his daughter. And so he allows a courtesan to be brought to the capital. And during this time, the Legislative Council is still supposed to vote on it. But the Legislative Council votes, and the old timers, the loyalists who retain the old values, are shocked that the king has changed his own position about courtesans. They are unable to understand why the king, who was so stoic, has suddenly become a hedonist himself. Nobody knows, of course, that the king is he has his own compulsions. And now the wealth of the exchequer is diverted to frivolous and sensual pursuits, because the old warrior Mahali dies of guilt. He was already on his last legs and he just dies. And the new king, Ratnakirti, who readers will recognize is Pandit Nehru, is now the new king. And he spends his money on frivolous things. The monk has just visited. And when the monk visits Vaishali, he discovers that the ferry is late. And he realizes that something is wrong with the discipline in the country, because such things never happened in the good old days when Mahali was king. The monk, since there is no ferry, the monk is forced to take a ride on a boat, which was clearly meant for a pleasure cruise. And then he discovers that there is a courtesan on board, and she happens to be his own former love. And so she tries to I've used the word blandishments, but it's not very accurate. She conducts herself with great dignity, but she's still in love with her former lover. But he refuses her. It's actually a very beautifully worded passage. And I will comment later that I have found Sitaramji's writing rather difficult in some places, but there are passages of very great beauty, and this is one of them. So the monk discovers when he enters the city that no one cares about his ochre robes anymore. So the Vrijis have started not honoring their religious leaders. They have stopped honoring, they have stopped paying, they have stopped giving offerings to the to the religious places, the Chaityas. The king Ratnakirti has now begun to extend his ideas into foreign affairs. He insults all the possible allies. So there is this, in central India, there is the Mahajanapada of Avanti. Avanti is fearful of Persian invasions. So Avanti is trying to make an alliance with the Vrijis, but Arya Ratnakirti ends up insulting people who have come to befriend him. And then he also explains that Magadha's attacks against the Vriji people result from the Vrijis' own mistakes. So he blames his own people for the attacks of aggressors, and he actually invites the enemy king to his capital with full state honors. So by this time, the Durgapal, Aniruddha, and the former princess Vatsala, they have realized their mistake in trusting the Brahmin Varshakara. So they start preparing for rebellion. But they are unable to succeed because before they get too much done, the story takes a different turn. So you may remember that one of the precepts was that the Vrijis never dishonored any woman. And now that also starts changing. The Vrijis, some noblemen have now become so corrupt that they try to dishonor a maiden. And Aniruddha kills the nobleman in order to protect the princess in a long altercation which I am fast forwarding through. So the commander is then banished. So the king Ratnakirti has not only rebuffed friendly states, he has welcomed an inimical state, and he has also gotten rid of his best commander. Now the commander Aniruddha is actually attacked by some Magadhan soldiers, mercenaries who are operating on Vaishali's soil. So they are enemy soldiers on the soil of Vaishali. But the former princess Vatsala is prepared for it. So she rescues Aniruddha. Aniruddha and Vatsala get married, but they have to part because Aniruddha has been banished, so he is living in hiding. And now all the patriots in the nation, the state of Vaishali, come under attack. The king Ajatashatru, the enemy king, has been invited to their capital city, and he is spending his night in the home of the courtesan. But he does not cohabit with her. He tells her that he is a follower of the Buddha. The courtesan is very impressed with him because she never really wanted to be a courtesan. She was actually a Shakya princess. She loses her lover, and then her kingdom is destroyed by invaders. And so she has been forced into this life. So she is very impressed with the king. But at night, she discovers that the king is not really a noble person. He's conspiring with the minister to kill his own hosts. She tries to warn the monk, her former lover, but she is killed because her every movement is being watched. The monk is blamed for the courtesan's death and beaten up and left for dead. The former princess Vatsala is accused of conspiracy and imprisoned. And an unknown horseman rescues the monk. Okay, his identity is not disclosed, but the reader can identify him as being Aniruddha. So when the monk has recovered, Aniruddha tries to rescue Vatsala, and he manages to succeed because there are still enough loyal people that he manages to go and rescue the former princess who has been imprisoned. And in the fighting, the Ratnakirti, who is the equivalent of Pandit Nehru, the new king, he is killed, and the traitorous minister is captured. But the king, Ajatashatru, the enemy king, has left. So the monk is sure that the enemy king is not a man who will give up, and he must have plans of returning. So the monk Udaya tells the hero and the heroine to abandon Vaishali because it is indefensible, he says. That the few people who are defending Vaishali will not be able to stop the big army from Magadha. The attack comes very soon because the minister had already informed the king of all the secret entrances. So at the end, what happens is that the former princess refuses to abandon Vaishali, which is her birthplace, and she has the memory of her kin folk there. She is unable to leave it. So they make a last stand and they attain Viragati. So the monks' counsel was that they should be more concerned about the whole of Aryavarta. They should be willing to sacrifice Vaishali temporarily in order to protect the rest of Aryavarta. But that advice is not heeded. And so the story ends on a tragic note. So here is my critique of the novel. My critique is again, maybe it may speak more about my own limitations and my knowledge of Sanskrit. So the novel is very powerful. And there are many interesting dialogues and many interesting plots. And especially in the dialogues, the author really expresses his criticisms of communism, Nehruism. So he describes how infiltrators take over a country, how misinformation is deliberately created, how genuinely patriotic people are sidelined. All that is described in the form of dialogues. The political character, the characters he has created are credible. They are very powerful. The author says that, Sitaramji says that in his preface, that the characters are not necessarily based on current political personalities, which is probably true because the same human failings keep manifesting time and again. So Sitaramji explicitly says that Ratnakirti and Sunakata are not only from a bygone age, they even exist today in some different form. So the author has used a highly Sanskritized language. And he has drawn upon a lot of words from Arthashastra, Natyashastra, and the Tripitaka. So Sitaramji in his epilogue explicitly says that he decided not to write in popular language, but in the language derived from the classical literature. And to a very large extent, he has succeeded. But every now and then there are words, there are epithets like the word Shadabhidna and Dashabala, which are not really accessible to common readers. Fortunately for me, I had learned a smattering of Sanskrit and I could recognize that these are terms for the Buddha from the Amarakosha. The author has provided his own glossary. They are of course very helpful, but the rest of the text is still very Sanskritized. Some of his descriptions, he tends to be extremely verbose. And I would put that down as a minor criticism of mine. But having said that, there are also places where, I'll come to that later. So there are places where he uses somewhat roundabout constructions, like saying, apne asan se uthan karke, instead of saying apne asan se uthkar. Now, sometimes he says, one of the characters says, mujhko shravan karen, instead of saying, mujhe suniye. And this kind of construction becomes a little difficult. But of course, the author is trying to create an authentic atmosphere for a period 2000 years ago. So that is understandable. Now, in my opinion, he overuses the device of alliteration. So, for example, here is this line which says, क्रोड़ में एक किसलय कोमल कलेवर कुसुमित होता. Or another place where he says, नेत्र युगल से निरंतर निस्यंदित निष्ठा की निर्मल निर्जरी. In poetry, this would have been not a problem at all, but in the prose, and especially modern prose, it does seem a little difficult to read. But as I said, those are minor quibbles, and there are only a few places. There are many passages of genuinely great beauty, very dignified prose. So one such passage is the monk who remains unmoved by his own former beloved's advances. And I really thought that there was a scene where the courtesan Anangarekha goes back to her former lover to warn him of the danger, but she is killed, and the description of the light of life leaving her eyes is very beautifully done. So I would say it compensates for any deficiencies I have diagnosed elsewhere. Oops. Okay. So that's the story of the book, the story of the novel. Now for the rest, is there a way I can get out of this PowerPoint mode?
You can stop sharing, Dilipji.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the things I wanted to say, it's a very long novel. I made a lot of notes from it. So what I found particularly impressive, and I found the attention to detail particularly realistic, is exactly how the plot goes, how they go about dismantling the existing kingdom, exactly how they go about spreading disharmony, and how one by one every precept gets violated. And I also, where I said that the vocabulary is a little hard, it turns out that the King Ratnakirti, he's fond of making very pompous speeches, and readers will recognize a certain national leader from India doing that. And the speeches are very, very pompous, but very vacuous. And they are very accurately captured in that language. So the choice of language must have been deliberate. But I do still think that a modern readership will have a hard time with it. And so it is my belief that if this novel were to be made, rewritten slightly, or made into a movie, it will certainly be a blockbuster. Okay, I'll stop there. I think I have spoken for very long, and now whatever else needs to be said, I'll try to answer it say it in the context of an answer to your questions.
Okay. Thank you, Dilipji. Thank you for that very deep, analytical and interesting analysis of the novel, Saptashila. Moving on to, at present, we have no questions regarding whatever you discussed. So is it okay if I move on to the next speaker?
Yes, perfect. Let me just say that I have translated just the epilogue of this, a kind of foreword, and I had sent it to Dr. Elst. So if any of you needs that, or if you want to read a summary of this, everything that I said, please email me and I'll send you whatever I have if it's interesting. If it's interesting to you, and I really hope that the novel will be translated into English at the earliest, and perhaps somebody more accomplished than me with a greater knowledge of Hindi and Sanskrit could do a better job of making it known to its target readership.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And I assure you, the analysis which you also gave was quite enlightening. So I feel you should not say that it was not up to the mark. So I really thank you for your time.